The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Greetings from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and welcome to another 1615 webinar. I'm Matthew Ellison, the president at 1615, and I want to thank you for joining us today for this very important topic. Before we dive into the webinar, I want to let you know about some upcoming events that 1615 wants to make available to church and missions leaders around the world. So we have a webinar coming up on August 23rd, 2017. All of our webinars happen at noon Mountain. And Jeremy Landis is our subject matter expert, and he's going to be talking about equipping the saints for overseas ministry. In particular, he's going to talk about how do you prepare individuals and teams to live in a cross-cultural context before they actually go overseas. So if you have missionaries in the chute ready to go, you'll definitely want to join us for this very important webinar. Got workers, got training. This webinar will address some of those issues. In response to requests from some of our mission agency partners, 1615 will be hosting a mission agency consultation in Albuquerque, New Mexico, October 25th through 27th. And the theme is engaging the church, pursuing the nations. There's a massive paradigm shift that's been underway for a couple of decades now, and it seems to be building momentum of local churches moving from a supportive role to an active role in world missions. And certainly this changes the way that mission agencies relate to and work with churches. So if you're a mission agency or a part of a missions organization and you want to engage the church more deeply in meaningful partnerships in pursuit of the nations, you'll definitely want to join us for this very important event. Again, Albuquerque, New Mexico, October 25 through 27. You can register at 1615.org. And then I want to make mention of a resource that we developed about 3 years ago. It's going into its third season. It's called the Mission Table. And the theme of the Mission Table is think deep about missions. One of the reasons we believe many churches don't do missions well is because they've not thought about missions well. So we gather leading missions thinkers and practitioners, and we tackle some of those critical and controversial topics impacting the missions world today. In fact, Larry McCrary, our presenter today, was on the first season. You can see some of his episodes and others at missiontable.org, missiontable.org. Seasons 1 and 2 are available for viewing. Season 3 will be recorded next week, and we'll start rolling those out in about 6-8 weeks from now. Again, I'm the host, Matthew Ellison. I want to thank you for joining us today. Today's webinar is entitled The Missionary's First 30 Days, How to Move from Surviving to Thriving on the Field. Navigating the days of living abroad, especially the first month, is challenging, not just to you personally, but to your faith. The faster you meet people, learn the culture, and build relationships, the sooner you will feel at home and can discover what God has in store for you. In this webinar, you're going to gain valuable insights that will help you or the people you send to adjust, thrive, and live intentionally overseas. Today's subject matter experts are Larry and Susan McCrary. Larry and Susan have been involved in the ministry and missions for over 30 years, both in the U.S. and overseas. They spent the past 15 years mostly in Europe. Larry is the co-founder and executive director of Upstream Collective and the founder of the Skybridge Community, an international marketplace network. Susan loves to speak and share about living intentionally and loving those around us. In just a moment, I'm going to hand the microphone over to Larry and Susan, but first, a couple of details. Your phones are muted to preserve sound quality. You can listen through your computer speakers, or you can call in on the telephone. As questions come to mind today, please type them in the question and answer panel located in the GoToWebinar task panel on the upper right-hand side of your screen. We will be addressing your questions for the last 15 to 20 minutes of our time together, and this is your opportunity to enter into the conversation with Larry and Susan. 80 people are registered for today's live webinar. I want to remind you that this webinar is also being recorded. It will be available for download at 1615.org in the next week. Again, you can watch it again at 1615.org in the next week. I'm going to turn the controls over to Larry and Susan, but first, Larry and Susan, thank you so much for sharing your time and your wisdom and experience with us. I'm going to give you controls, and you can take it from here.
All right. Thank you, Matthew. It's great for us to be here today, and great being a part of this. And so we're very excited about our time. And we aspire to equip churches. Upstream does aspires to equip churches to more effectively send out their members to reach the nations next door and all over the world by teaching them essential skills that enable them to think and act like missionaries. And so it's been a great privilege to get to know Matthew over the years. We share a lot of same ideas and strategies, and so excited to see this movement of churches that are really wanting to go from just supporting to really participating and being an active part of work. One of the questions that we get asked quite a bit is, why would we have a resource such as First 30 Days? So Susan and I have lived overseas for the last 15 years. We've lived in Madrid. We've lived in Germany, near Basel, Switzerland. Often when I speak and I talk about the places that we live, I get a lot of sympathy votes because we've lived in such tough places. So I get that. But we haven't lived overseas for the last 15 years. One thing is for certain, it means that we have made plenty of mistakes. And in our roles and the different things that we've done have required us to move often city to city, country to country, back to the States, back to Europe. And so we've had to start over quite a bit. And we've done some things right, but we have messed up plenty. And so I think a lot of our journey is just talking about that and being able to help others maybe not make some of the same mistakes. We moved back to the States about a year ago. We remember being in a park on a very sunny day in Madrid, and we were talking about our first days in Madrid and all that we learned once we hit the ground. And it was just a great way for us as a couple to debrief our time and to think through about this transition. And we actually started making a list that we felt like, well, it would be great as we recount these stories that if we could create something that would help people, do well when they land. And so what if we could create a book that was devotional, missional living ideas and practical to-dos each day? And so that's what we did as we kind of rolled out First Days. One of the ways that we frame our training as we train new workers to live abroad, to be able to develop their head, heart, and hands. What knowledge, what skills do we need to teach them? How do we help them look into their heart, help them care for their soul? What task could you do during these first 30 days? Which, by the way, we intentionally spelled DAZE, D-A-Z-E, because pretty much that's what it is when you first move to a new place. You're just pretty much in a daze. And how could we help people not just survive a move, but start well and thrive in a new culture? And so we started thinking through who this would be for. And we see here, once over the years, with our various roles in our organizations, we've had the opportunity to coach, lead, and manage hundreds of people on the field. Some intentionally moved overseas with a sense of calling to the nations or a people or a city, and they're often vocational missionaries. Sometimes they're midterm missionaries. They're humanitarian aid or development workers. But others were study abroad students. They were marketplace workers. They were teachers, engineers, coders, artisans, and they were retirees. And I remember a story from a guy who was in Switzerland, who I had the opportunity to move to Switzerland and to get a job in a pharmaceutical company. And so he was just thinking about all the plus sides of moving to Switzerland. I get, a Swiss bank account, Swiss cheese, Swiss chocolate, Swiss passport, all of the upside of it. And he moves to Switzerland, and within a month, is when we contacted him through our community. And he said, Larry, I'm really not just an engineer in this pharmaceutical company. I'm really, a missionary, because I've never met a person here that has had the gospel explained to them in a practical, relevant, personal way. And so often we have this group of workers that are, that could be study abroad students, marketplace workers, people that have retired overseas that are almost like accidental missionaries. In Madrid, our last time through, we were on a journey with, for 2 different years with about 10 teachers that actually come over to teach English in Spain, and they love Jesus. They want to live intentional. And so we just help them land well, start well, provide some community, provide some accountability, and provide some strategic direction. But there's also another group, Susan, you just learned about.
I have. Hi, I'm Susan, and I'm just going to jump in here for a minute and tell you about another group that just came to my attention that would benefit from this book about the first 30 days. And it actually was a recommendation from my mom, of all people, which shouldn't be a surprise because she's always been able to point me in give me wise direction in my life. But she said that when she read the book, for her it was very eye-opening because it kind of gave her a clear picture of what our lives were like on a day-to-day basis over there. Sure, we of course told her when we lived over there what it was like. We would call back home, try to describe it, but she felt like that the book was a very clear picture of simple ways that she could pray, that she could know what we were going through, and ways to encourage us even when she talked to us on the phone. So she recommended that even to pass this along to parents of missionaries going overseas, or even other family members, friends. It could be something good for advocate groups, community groups that are sending someone, or through the church, for the church. And so this to me was very insightful, a new way to look at how do we help people who are the senders to also be equipped to know how to pray, encourage, and actually empathize with what the missionaries going through.
Yeah, to know day-to-day life actually. Yes. Overseas and what that looks like. When you look at this grouping on your slides, and you often the vocational missionaries and the midterm workers are, they're preparing to go. They've been kind of preparing on this runway. There's some preparation time for their move. But for many of the others, study abroad, marketplace, retirees and such, they've really not had that same training time, that same process time. And so as we have seen agencies as well as churches, and our church, we're very keen on how do we find ways to send marketplace workers and students to the field. As we have more and more emphasis on this, we have to find ways to prepare them to go as well, and to be ready to go, almost, just ready to pick up and move. And so as we started to write out and train people what to do during their first 30 days. And honestly, we heard from some people just this summer in Spain and Italy that have been using the resource, and they said they basically had to do this several times, like almost like 90 days. They've read the same book 3 times in a row, just to be able to kind of make it a part of who they are, make it a part of what they do. I wanted to give one more context piece. A couple of years ago at Upstream, we wrote out a definition of sending church. And so as we began learning from experience and talking with a ton of practitioners, what were the key elements of being a good sending church? And one of the elements, getting sent ones established, made the list. So, and I think the audience of today would almost be the same way. If the church, if you're a pastor or a mission leader in your church, you want to see your sent ones start off well. If you're a part of an organization, a sending organization or an agency, you desire that the worker that's coming adapts to culture, life, language, and is able to have missionary engagement. And if you're a person that's actually preparing to go, or that's living in your first days overseas, you don't want to just merely survive and make it through the day, but you really want to learn how to thrive.
Yeah, and like Larry had said, this book had been on our hearts for a couple of years, just so we could find a way to share with others what we had learned. Because as we look back, and when we first moved overseas, there are things we did well, and there are things that we didn't do so well. And we felt like that a very practical guide that is also devotional, also journal, and has application principles with it, would be a short but useful tool for helping people start well in a new culture. And so we just wanted to pass along what we consider great advice, things that we learned along the way. Larry was mentioning the surviving to thriving, and that's so important, because surviving, we just are just barely feeling like we're making it, whereas thriving does not mean that it's problem free, but it means that you're better equipped to problem solve, or hopefully even avoid some problems. And because there's so many new things that you learn when you cross cultures, so many things that you'll be inundated with for learning, the more tools you have, obviously, the better it will be. For example, we saw a friend of ours start well by actually giving her friends, family, supporters in her church a first month prayer calendar for her first month on the field, and each day would have a specific prayer request for something that she knew that she would be sorting through, figuring out, dealing with, such as finding housing, learning the city, finding out how to get around, dealing with visa issues, making friends, learning language, and many, many other things. So she was helping those at home to know specifically how to pray for her. And she knew that when she was overseas on her own, then she would have that comfort of knowing that there was support behind her each and every day for those first days. She was also intentional about not communicating with those back in her home culture for that first month, and staying off social media, which sounds like a hard, maybe even very difficult thing to do, but is super important, because what that allowed her to do was to be fully engaged, fully immersed, and completely dependent on those around her for what she needed. Of course, when you go to a new place, it can be exciting at first, but then there can be those feelings of longing for family and friends, longing for home, a bit of homesickness. And so to try to resist the urge to look back and be more involved with what's going on back at home, but to try to stay engaged with where you are and leaning into that culture and letting those people there help you, makes it be home all the quicker, that you adjust much more quickly when you do it that way. And that's a wonderful way to start well, to acclimate to your new home. In contrast, when we look back, we saw a way that we could have actually improved our starting well. There are many ways, but one of them is, if we had not had a car from the first day on, we were fortunate enough to be provided with a car when we got there, which was nice, having two small children, a lot of luggage, a lot of errands to run. It was most certainly convenient. But looking back, we think it might have been better if we had not had a car, where we were more dependent upon figuring out how to do those things we needed to do within the city through the public transportation, through relying upon neighbors and others to tell us where to go and what to do. The car almost could have become more just like a cocoon for us to keep us from actually engaging to our fullest potential. We would have been better immersed to discover our city more without that, possibly. I think that we all have an inner need to be self-sufficient, self-reliant, not needy. That's just human nature in us. But when we're needy is when we are best able to engage with those around us, because we do need their help. We can ask for help, and then we're engaging with others, and that is most certainly opening doors for relationships. These are just a few of many, many examples that we've seen and experienced over the years on the need to start well.
Yeah, and we could probably go on forever. I know for me, another one that jumps off my, on the list would be starting spiritual conversations early. And so how can we encourage people that are, starting off, just moving to a new city, maybe, they most likely will not know the language. And so what happens, at least in my case, is you kind of get frozen as time goes on. You start learning the language and you realize how much you have to go and how terrible you are at the language and that sort of thing. And then you end up kind of freezing, and you want to build friends, you want to make friends, you want to build, get into relationships. And one of the things I wish we had done earlier is to be able to start spiritual conversations early. Not, it's good to talk about news, sports, and weather. We love doing that. We love hanging out. We love just being able to talk about life. But one of the things I wish we had done better would be start off spiritual conversations a little bit earlier. We wouldn't want to get to the point where we're a year or two into it and we still not brought up anything about the gospel or about spiritual things. And that's just actually a lot easier. That happens a lot easier than one may think. Even when you're intentionally trying to go and be a missionary, often you can get stuck in not wanting to be rejected, the need for acceptance, and that could be a divisive conversation, and you put it off. So we really try to encourage people to do that very early. In fact, when you do it in the first week or two, what I have found that people that tend to start out that way continue sharing their faith on a regular basis. Another thing that I wanted to take a look at is kind of this 45-day on-ramp. When I consider how people prepare, I like using this analogy. I think it's important as we're mobilizing people other than the traditional pathway of a vocational missionary. The first part of that would be kind of the runway. And this is what we mostly do, and this is kind of what we're set up to do as churches and agencies. And it's quite natural. The runway could be as long as 2 years from the time a person senses a call, goes through assessment, finds a place, an agency, raises support, prepares to leave. This gives people the opportunity to prepare and to process their move. But with people who take an alternative pathway into missions, we see the need more for like a heliport, like helicopters. They take off and land. They go straight up. They lift off vertically. And often we find the preparation time and process time is much shorter for these people that are in alternative pathways. We have a couple from our church that recently went on a vision trip in Europe, and they were pretty much offered a job on the spot. They were not prepared to go in that sort of way, but they were offered the job. And so what do? Do you decline on the job? We know people that basically are thinking about going overseas. They're open to going overseas, and then all of a sudden they get the offer from their company to make that kind of transfer, make that transfer jump, and they don't have 2 years. Their company's not going to say, okay, yeah, go ahead and wait 2 years until you prepare. They're going to say you need to be there in a month, you need to be there in 2 months. And so how do we as a church, as an agency, really help this 45-day pre-field launch? And so we encourage people to have prayer groups where they do have advocates. They have people that are praying for them, and they're being very specific about their prayers. We want them to read up on the culture. When we talk about this in the book Tradecraft, we want them to learn how to do cultural exegesis, to draw out from the culture. Some of that can be done before they land. Most of it's going to be done after, but they can do a lot of research on the culture and the people. We want them to start thinking through what the gospel looks like in that culture. We want them to understand what security issues that they may face in the country that they're living in. What are some missional skills, like person of peace and sharing the gospel, mapping the city. All of these things we're wanting them to kind of think through and do before they actually go, so that when they hit the ground and when they land in their new city, all of a sudden these things, what you don't know, what you don't know, all of a sudden becomes a reality, and you start going like, I need that, I need that. That's why we talked about that. And so these missional living skills, being disciple makers, trying to get a jump start on language, all these are important parts of this 45-day on-ramp. And even cultural adaptation shifts. Going to, in most parts of the world, they use a 24-hour clock opposed to our 12-hour clock here in the States. The use of public transportation, we're moving from Fahrenheit to Celsius. So we try to do some of that during our prep time. I mean, I changed my watch on my, to a 24-hour clock, and it helped me greatly. We sold one of our vehicles, and we were living in the northern Atlanta suburbs at a time. We sold it about 3.5, 4 months before we moved. That was a sacrifice in and of itself to survive the suburbs of Atlanta with one car. But it made us it kind of forced us to really talk about our day more, talk about our logistics, taking a bus, finding other ways to get there. And it prepared us for this shift of culture that we were going to face. And then also even the temperature, which I still get very much confused. But, looking outside and seeing it, it's 30 degrees Celsius, and that means it's a little bit hotter. Another thing that we wanted to talk about would be the kind of the first 30 days on the ground. Some key things to consider. And so what we want to do is kind of break into several of these topics that I think that will help people that you're preparing to go, people that you're helping to prepare to go, people that have already landed. Again, we want them to continue having a prayer connection, a prayer group. We want them to be out in the new city. And you think, that's pretty automatic. People want to do that. But we found often in these days of social media, it's sometimes hard to get out of the house. We can just hide behind our computers, and we can never get out or not get out much. And so we want people to get out in their new city, and we want to encourage them to do that. And so giving them some tasks that would help them get out in the new city and learn about it and find and fall in love with it. To be able to get some coaches. There's more and more, I'm hearing from churches and organizations utilizing mission coaches for people that are just moving on. So for the first 3 months, first 6 months, they have a once a month, twice a month phone call with a mission coach. And it's not in their field supervisory, chain. It's not in their organization. It's a third party who's able to really speak into, listen, ask the right questions, but it really helps them start adapting into this new culture. We encourage them to find a church and faith community early on, to be able to get involved, to be able to lock into their people and into their church. And then also strategic engagement and intentional living. This may be a church, it may be a missionary team, it may be a service organization, but we're wanting them to have some strategic focus. And we find that people, especially when you're a marketplace type worker, having that strategic focus really helps you lock into your purpose, your reason of being there, and kind of gives you just kind of this, it just reinforces your calling, reinforces your desire to share the gospel. We created a first 30 days checklist. Now it's too long for this PowerPoint, but here's some critical ones, and you can actually get this on our documents page at our upstream site or in the back of the first 30 days book. But it's basically a list of about, 25, 30 things that we feel that are pretty important. They're just logistical things, but we feel like if you can do this in your first day's checklist, then it helps you get started. So like making a map or finding a map and marking up the gathering spots, the places that you see people frequent, and places and things to do on that list, getting to know your neighborhood, getting to know your city, putting that down on paper and kind of visualizing it is very critical. Getting cell phones connected or buying minutes, finding the route to the nearest hospital or clinic, understanding what the new emergency number is. You're used to 911, what's the new number? Is it 112 in Europe, or what is that number? But just little things that will help you adapt into the culture and get to know the culture better. Practice routes home with the family, including public transportation. We would often do this with new workers. I would take them out on the first or second day. They'll be pretty tired and jet lagged, and I'll take them to a part of the city, and we'll talk and have a coffee and do some training and such. But then I let them get home on their own. I check in with them. I make sure they have a cell phone or a way to get in touch in case they get lost. But I'm wanting them to get out and get some confidence in public transportation.
We did that with our daughter as well. When she entered the teenage years, we knew she would want to be out more on her own. We actually taught her how to use public transportation wisely and how to make choices. Larry would even take her down to the middle of town, which is about 20 minutes from where we lived, and say, okay, get me home, and let her lead in that. Or say, okay, the trains are on strike today, which happened quite a bit in Europe. Find another route home. And so just being able to be competent in knowing your city really helps you to thrive better.
Yeah, again, as we look at this checklist, another couple that popped me is finding city. Very important things: finding the ATM machine, finding a local doctor, identifying local parks and places that you can play. Some of these are just some, a few of the ones that we list out that are, if you can at least have it on paper and have it as a checklist, it helps the new person be able to start getting in and moving from just, from that surviving piece to really getting to know their city, getting to know key elements of their city, and being able to thrive.
Yeah, I would like to just highlight a few of the chapters in the book, just to give you a little sampling, a little taste of what the book is about. The first one that I'd like to highlight is actually the first chapter in the book. And it's the one that I have found to be definitely critical to my cross-cultural adaptation, but really also in all of my life's journey, and that is humility. There is much opportunity to practice humility outside of your comfort zone and in another culture. We were new at really almost everything. So we made many mistakes, cultural faux pas. We most certainly needed help. One great example of this is language. Language learning. It's the perfect setting for humility. I literally couldn't talk to anyone. And that was not only very humbling, but it was frustrating as well, just trying to communicate, which is a high need for us to do as humans. So it was very difficult to struggle with language. And then as I began to learn language, it was coming out very broken, very simple sentences, and definitely lots of mistakes in my sentences. I can remember taking my children to a pet store. They wanted to see how much the little bunny was that was in the window. So I go in with my children and I ask the sales attendant there, how much is the bunny? At least that's what I thought I was asking. And actually I ended up asking, how much is that crab? Because it's a similar word in the language we were learning. My children just left me standing there. They walked right out the door on me. They knew what I had said. Typically your children learn language faster even than you do. And so I had to learn to be humbled very quickly, even with my language learning. But, humility is much more than language mistakes or cultural mistakes. It really is a matter of the heart. It's a willingness to be a humble learner with those around you and in a new culture. Human nature makes us want to combat that discomfort of being brought low by making us exert ourselves all the harder to prove our worth. That's what we want to do. We want to stand up for ourselves and defend ourselves and make ourselves feel more worthwhile in the environment we're in. When we feel inadequate, we so want to show those around us that we aren't. But truth is, you are when you're in a new culture. When you cross cultures, that's what it's going to be. And so to accept that and be okay with your deficiencies is the best place to start. And to get into a posture of humility and to not let our self and our deficiencies be our focus. You are the new one in a new place. You're a guest in this new place. These people around you, they can help you. And so trust them, lean on them, be willing to admit you don't know, and be willing to learn from the people around you. People appreciate when you are sincere and you have a humble spirit. They know when you're being authentic and you're vulnerable with them, as opposed to being proud and self-sufficient. And the wonderful thing about this is that it also esteems them as well. It gives them value because you're leaning upon them. You're letting them help you. It opens doors of opportunity for relationship and sharing the gospel with them. In our book, we also have, with each chapter, there's 30 chapters. Each chapter has a Bible passage, a devotional, and then also has an application and a journaling section. It's a small book, and so everything is very bite-sized, because we know in those first 30 days on the field, you cannot digest a very large amount of material of reading or anything too in-depth or difficult. So it's very small. But so the application idea for this day of humility was an exercise of going out in your city with this attitude of humility, where you have an outward and an upward focus. And what we mean by that is an outward focus to see others around you instead of looking at self and what's going on with you, but to engage with those around you. Look at the needs around you and be sensitive to and perceptive to what others are going through around you, so that you can be more willing to engage with them. And then having an upward focus as you pray for them, and then you rely on God to completely lead you through your day with a humble heart and a receptive spirit towards others. When we're humble, we're dependent upon the Lord, and that's exactly where He desires us to be. The second chapter that I want to point out is Initiating Conversation. And this is really about asking questions to those around us. Humility is actually a great precursor to this chapter, because it will help us to have a posture of, it's not all about me. If we're already in deference to others because of our humble focus, then our conversations will be focused on who we're talking to, what their needs are, and not about ourselves. Learning the skill of asking questions and embracing that awkwardness of initiating conversations is very helpful. It's how you do get into relationship and into conversation with people. We will do better in cross-cultural adaptation if we step out of our comfort zone early and often. Early in our time on the field, as soon as we get there, and often in our days, continually talking with those around us, which definitely can be a challenge when you're learning language as well. But there is a language rule that you have to use what you learn in order to keep it. And that's really what you have to do. Even if it's a simple greeting, if you're using it every day, that's what's going to make it stay with you. When we first moved to Spain, our children started in Spanish public school the very first week. It was overwhelming for them, and it was overwhelming for me as mom to drop them off every day in this new and strange environment for them. I wanted to be a part so much, and I wanted to get to know others. I kept asking my son's first grade teacher if there's anything that I could do to help. Was there any way that I could be involved? She sort of looked at me strangely to begin with, because parents don't typically reach out to help, but I was persistent in it, and she finally invited me to come on the field trip that the class took to the local swimming pool, where they took swimming lessons once a week. Several other Spanish mothers went with us to chaperone, and as the moms sat around drinking coffee and waiting for the children to finish the lesson, I sat with them, and I had a couple of very small, simple questions to ask them about the community and about what they did, just to engage with them. And so I began to ask them things about where they like to shop, things about their city, where were the parks that they took their children to. And one of them had a curious look on her face, and she asked me, why didn't I go to the International Women's Club, where lots of other American women were, so that I could be with them, since they would be able to help me, even just within my own language or from their own experiences. And I told her that I wanted Spanish friends, and I wanted to be at home in my new city with their culture, their food, their activities. And I wanted my children to engage with their children and be friends with them too. And she looked at me and said, I will be your first Spanish friend. because she knew that I was putting myself out there, making effort to try to be friends, and that meant a lot to her. It gives value to her because she knows that I care for her. She was touched that a foreigner would want to be with her, be in her world, accept her culture. You know, it blesses others to accept them and be a part of their lives. We don't want to pull people out of their oikos and their culture and make them enter ours. We want to enter theirs. Jesus went out of his way to meet people. He stopped, he looked at them, he listened, he asked good questions, and that opened doors and it opened hearts. And through his model of that, we can most certainly do the same. And the application for this day in our book was to come up with a simple question to ask in your new language, and go ask it. Try your best to use the language that you have. For example, like, where is the bus stop? How do we ask something simple like that? Or how much does this cost in a store? What is a good restaurant in town? Simple questions, but beginning to engage with those questions in intentional conversations. Lastly, one of the best pieces of advice that I received and that I could give anyone else going overseas is to be a learner. And this is one of our chapters in our book. When we moved to Europe, I found that there is a stereotype that Europeans had about Americans, that we are arrogant and we are proud. And we as a culture in America do have a tendency to be individualistic. We're a bit of a do-it-yourself, be strong, I can do this attitude. And yes, it's okay to be prepared, to be informed and confident and capable. But if you have the attitude of having all the answers, that's going to be conveyed to those that are around you. We do want to share the gospel, and we desire to teach others about Jesus. But we must be careful not to come into a new culture as the one who is the expert, the one with the answers, but instead to be a servant-hearted follower of Jesus, bringing hope to the lost with a humble spirit. We can feel that the goal is, sometimes we feel like the goal is to get them to listen to me. And because we do want to share. And that's a normal response. So we begin to think, how am I going to go out and share? That's what I want to do. So our motivation then all of a sudden can become, what am I saying? As opposed to, really, what am I hearing? What am I listening to? How am I asking good questions? How am I engaging with them and letting them even lead in that and lead to that conversation about the gospel? I think also we shouldn't assume that we know what this people group we're around believes. Yes, we can do research before we go. We can learn about them, but we don't want to make assumptions that that's what all people are believing. And so what a great way to engage conversation and be a learner. Ask them what they believe, and let them share with you, and let that be the bridge that opens doors to conversation about the gospel. When you desire to be a learner, you are building a bridge to sharing Christ, and you're loving others well, which is what we want to do. Paul is a great example of this, as he learned the customs and the cultures of those that he encountered. One thing that we try to encourage people to do as they go overseas, to have this learner posture, is to not to resist the temptation to Google everything to find answers. You can Google anything you want to know, but we ask people to resist that urge. Walk away from technology and walk toward people and begin learning from people, because that's how we get into relationship with them. So these are just a few of the chapters to highlight from our book, to how we help people best thrive instead of survive, and how do they start well when they enter a new culture.
Yeah, so you heard from us, and Matthew, we're going to turn it back over to you, and we'll be happy to try to answer any questions that you may have, or interact with you some on this topic.
Absolutely. Let me first thank you guys. What a rich presentation. I really appreciate the personal experiences that you wove in, and just the incredible practical insights. So thank you again for sharing. I want to address the audience, all of you online right now. This is your chance to interact with Larry and Susan. Ask any questions that you might have. Let me open up the Q&A panel here. Again, if you don't know where that's at, it's on the right-hand side of the screen under questions. So here we go. How can we start spiritual conversations early with people when we can't speak the language?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, when we moved to Spain, I knew Yo Quiero Taco Bell, and that's about it. And so, yeah, I think what you have to do is rely on, in those early days, rely on somebody that may know the language. So if you have a person that's on your team, maybe it's another believer. Again, I think this is important when you're, if you're connected to a national church or something, but finding a person there that can help translate for you early, I think can be one way. Another is, just praying that the Lord would open the door for you to have someone that would have the ability to speak in whatever your first language would be. I know that's not our end game. We obviously want to learn the language. We want to get into people's heart language, but in those early days, being able to find a way to share your faith, and so we often will try to tell people to prepare basically their testimony, how to share the gospel in very basic English so that they can do that either to someone that knows some English or with a translator.
Yeah, that's a great way to do it. And really keeping it simple at the beginning, honestly, is the best way anyway. The ability to, when you're being vulnerable and sharing with a friend that you don't know what to do, but being able to say, I'm thankful for the hope I have. And sometimes you have to construct these sentences ahead of time and have them prepared to say. So it doesn't have to be a very long discourse of information. It can be just a simple word that we speak into people's life to say, to speak about the hope that we have.
Yeah, and what we find, Matthew, is that it actually helps build confidence. And the longer you go without trying that, it often and then you realize how, much you stink at their language, you become afraid. You go, I'll get to do this once I get the language perfect. And so that's one reason we encourage people to try to start early.
That's really good insight. So Deborah Merritt says, excellent presentation, ! And I agree with that, guys. Great stuff. Thank you. She wants to know how the book can be purchased.
Yeah, so you can get it on Amazon. If you want it in bulk, our upstream site has the ability to be able to help you get a bulk rate. But you can just pick it up on Amazon in print copy or Kindle. We find a lot of people that go overseas put it on Kindle just because you only have so many pounds. But we really love the interaction that it has with the journal.
That's good. So Anna Wright asks, what is your advice for marketplace workers on engaging with the culture and learning in the first 30 days while also starting a new job? How do you set priorities and balance different aspects of your life?
Yeah, that's another great question. We're working on a project right now with people that are going in and trying to integrate from marketplace into kind of some sort of a team on the field. And so we help them try to look at their day, and there's just so many things that are going to be happening. And so hopefully being able to get some coaching would be helpful, and mentoring, being able to start learning the language. Many of the jobs that are overseas will have some sort of a language component where you actually can learn the language. Sometimes it's at lunch hour or before or after. But I believe really trying to find those ways, that you can plug into existing ministries may be one aspect, but also what we found is that many of the people, like my friend I was telling you about in Switzerland, could never, I can never get into the same group of people. I would not have the access to the same group of people. And so helping them see that their job is part of the mission. It is part of the main thing, and being able to help them to see that it's not some compartmentalized type of work that they're doing, that it all can work together no matter where they're living, where they're working, when they're playing. If they live with intentionality, they can be involved. We just like to try to find ways to connect them to another believer or another community or even a missionary team that could help give some strategic direction and help them find some ways to have some strategic roles.
And I think some of the principles in the book are simple enough and practical enough that they're actually helpful whether you're on the job or, from home.
Very good. This person asks, you address some of the challenges that mothers would face on the field, but can you share any more insights about some of the unique challenges that a mother might face and how to deal with those when they're entering the field?
I think there's a lot of different challenges that mothers can feel, and a lot of that too has to do with the mother's personality and her parenting style, kind of the way that she is viewing her parenting. I think so I can speak for myself, I feel like one of my biggest challenges was finding that correct boundary about wanting to protect. That just was sort of a key instinct for me and always has been a need of just gauging how my children are doing, sensing how they're doing well, and when do I step in, when do I not. And so my walk with the Lord, my dependence upon him was very critical to my ability to let go of my children and realize that they belong to him. He's with them every moment of every day. My praying for them changed drastically as I just really began to release them to him. And God showed me that he was working in their lives through this awesome opportunity to be overseas, even as much as he was for my husband and I. And so it just gave me a completely different perspective on my parenting, a different perspective on my children, and how the Lord was working even through their lives as we were overseas.
And I would add that about Susan is that I think she has the ability, one, to give herself grace, and we often just don't do that. Sometimes when we live overseas, we take ourselves so seriously, and we just when we make mistakes or we don't get the boundaries right or whatever, we just don't have a lot of grace. And the other thing is she just has fun in all that she's doing. And I think having fun with the kids and family and friends, as we've met them, I think both of those are just great attributes that she has as a mom.
I'm really glad to hear you say that, Larry. I think sometimes we think fun is not spiritual, but having fun with kids, that's holy stuff. Being family, enjoying each other. And that's one of the things that makes the gospel attractive when they see the love that a family has for one another. So I'm really happy to hear you say that.
That's one of our chapters.
Oh, fantastic. Someone asks here, do you address some of the challenges that singles face on the field in the book? And if not, maybe you could just speak to that for a moment.
We actually thought of that. We have so many singles that we lived with overseas and got to know, and we wanted to make the book applicable to all peoples overseas. And so we took that into mind. And so I feel like that the chapters are applicable for both. Even on the one that we did write one chapter about kids, doing life as a family overseas and kids. And we actually put at the beginning of a chapter to not disregard this chapter if you're single, because being around families is a natural thing that would happen. And so how to do life together in community, whether single or married, with kids or without, how do we do that well together? And so, I feel like that hopefully the book can address both parties well.
Yeah, and I would say that, the majority of the people that we really were part of, being able to be a part of their lives and community that were marketplace workers, were singles. And so we really had that kind of automatically in our minds as we try to put it together.
That's good. So this person says that a lot of the topics are clearly general, but can you recommend how you might use some of these or apply them in a Muslim context or a closed country situation?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so yeah, that's a good word. I mean, again, a lot of our living experience has been in Europe, which is, it's not as restricted. You have to be careful and such, obviously. But I think in the Muslim context and in some of these more difficult parts of the world, some of the same principles still apply. You're still really hoping to find a person of peace. You're being able to. I remember a few years ago, we were near the border of Syria, and we were working with refugees, and we were just blown away. In many ways, we were thinking how we could go and help and take these packages and be able to help them out. And as we sat in this small little room, being able to see them serve us tea and cookies, and they just arrived in the country. And for us to really have the spirit of not just practice in hospitality, but how do we receive hospitality? And I think that's just going to only happen in the spirit of humility. It's going to only happen when you put yourself as a person that's willing to learn. And so I think that crosses cultures, even crosses situations. Yeah, there's going to be some pieces of that you have to kind of figure out, and how do you adapt that to that particular city. But I think the principles are very similar.
Yeah, we even had a friend who lived within that type of culture, and we had her look over the book, and she gave us some little ideas for that, and even we added a couple of her own stories from being in a Muslim culture into the book. So
yeah, that's one reason why we put it on Kindle. But I think our real desire, because I don't think it's really rocket science, it's not some new thing. We hope that people can read it and be able to kind of just make it to be a natural part of their life. It's just how they do life. And
wherever they are. And so it may not be in a printed form for them, but it's just kind of how the way that they're doing life and living intentionally overseas.
So I have another great question here. This is from Ruth Milligan. She says, this seems to be really city oriented, at least the presentation. What about people going to third world countries living in rural situations? Do you think a lot of this still applies? And maybe that's kind of similar to the last question.
I actually did some work with refugees in other places, which were more what she's describing and asking about. And I took these principles with me and field tested them while I was there, and found that they were equally helpful. And I think that's why it is more general, more practical in the nature of the book, is so that it is transferable. So like Larry was saying, just the simple, humility, being a learner, and how we engage with people can be transferred to whatever environment that you might be in.
Yeah, and we have like one of the things we talk about is the rhythm of life, and obviously the rhythm of life in our week in an urban setting is going to look different. But when we look at it from a standpoint of a rural area, they also have a rhythm of life. It may start early in the morning. It may have some breaks in the day, but understanding your city, your place, wherever that would be, their rhythm of a week is going to be important for you to be able to learn to thrive. Because if you're going to bed just as everybody else is going out, or you're waking up long after everyone else is already up and had breakfast and working in the fields or something, then you're not on the same rhythm. And so that's what we want to help people do, is kind of understand their culture, do proper cultural exegesis, and that's going to help them actually figure out their context and way to live among the people.
So you mean if I go to a country that takes siestas, I have to learn how to take a midday nap?
Oh, yes.
I can promise you that it may take a week, but that's about it. You'll be able to catch on.
Oh, that's good. Hey, listen, folks, we have 2 minutes left. I'm going to allow each of you just to give a summary statement, maybe an exhortation to the audience, and then we'll wrap it up.
We just so love to be able to share with others, our hearts. Really, this is just from the heart is what it is. And helping people be the best they can be and do the best they can, and just to be able to love those around them well. That's really our intention, is just to come alongside and help others to love others well.
Yeah, and we just believe that starting is super important. And I remember running a 5K, and I wasn't in great shape. And I ran with this guy that was in really great shape, and so he wanted to run up towards the front of the pack, and I didn't realize what that meant, that everybody really runs fast up there. And so as we started off, and it's the first mile was downhill. It was probably the fastest mile that I've ever ran in my life. And the second mile was pretty level, and I started leveling off and running out of energy pretty quickly. Definitely couldn't keep up. And the third mile on this 5K, which is kind of your last mile, was pretty much up a hill. And I was toasted. I mean, I had to walk. I made it to the finish line, but I was not really doing well. And I think what helped me was, what I get from that is learning how to pace myself in life, pace myself in ministry, and again, going in, having good expectations, not unrealistic ones, of what you can do when you first start, and being able to pace yourself well is important as you begin.
That's a good word. We have to take breaks and pace ourselves if we're going to find that pace we need to finish the race. So again, Larry, Susan, thank you so much for sharing out of your life's journey, and it was enriching, it was practical. I want to remind everyone that this webinar has been recorded. It will be available within a week at 1615.org. If you'd like information about church missions coaching, which is what 1615 does, you can also find out about that at 1615.org as well. I'm going to leave this slide up so that all of you online can capture Larry's information if you have questions for him. Or again, if you're interested in the book, you can purchase on Amazon, other places, or contact Larry directly here. Thank you again, Larry and Susan, for sharing with us today. I'm Matthew Ellison for 1615. Thank you to our audience. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.